Welcome to Leadership Matters, a podcast hosted by me, Steve Parker, a series that brings a fresh perspective to leadership, motivation, and how to succeed by talking to a diverse range of CEOs, business managers, and world-class talent. We also offer some personal tips to help you in your career. Each episode aims to provide a snapshot into the life and philosophy of some of Taiwan and the world's most successful leaders, and to find out more about why leadership matters. So we're super lucky today to have Raoul Kubitschek in the studio. I've known Raoul for a long time. He's been living and working in Taiwan since the end of 2007. For the last 3 years, he's been serving as the managing director of the Taiwan subsidiary of NIRAS, a Danish multidisciplinary engineering company mainly involved in the offshore wind industry. He started his career working, I think, in the German government. He was in the German trade office here from 2007 to 2015. He was that guy who was talking about offshore wind before anybody else was talking about it. And it's a fascinating journey to see how he got from someone who was passionate about renewables to a point now where he's actually kind of leading an industry that is changing Taiwan. He's a proud father of 4. It's something that's very important to him, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. It's great to have you here in the studio, Raoul. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Steve.
You know, I met you first when you worked for the German trade office many, many years ago. And then suddenly you were talking about renewable energy. How did you know about this stuff before everybody else did?
I think that came with the job right out of university and then coming to Taiwan, actually on an internship, which then turned into a full employment with the German chamber. And Germany has been a long-time advocate of renewable energy, so we were naturally promoting things like energy transition. Even before I joined, there was a lot of activity from that German chamber towards geothermal, solar, then onshore wind, and then actually in 2009, somehow offshore wind slowly came up, and there was some interest from Germany, but also from developers here. So I kind of worked myself into this because my background is in Chinese studies and economics, which is actually quite broad. So and then you just pick some topics that you start to feel passionate about, and you start to learn more about the industry because you get exposed to a lot of people, ideas and thoughts, and then been fortunate enough that actually in 2015-16 offshore wind really took off in Taiwan. Because early on it was still like, oh, why would you put turbines into the water? Why would you do that? You know, that's so complicated.
So this is, I mean, yeah. Did you know that this was going to be successful?
No.
And get, no.
No. That you could always construct this like, you know, you have peak oil and you really need to do something against climate change. And that's why renewable has to start. But then it's so dependent on the government, you never know. When I was actually starting at the German trade office, they were thinking about a gigawatt of solar by 2010, which never happened in Taiwan. And still now the 25 goals are not working, but it got a little bit lucky. Because also offshore wind, interestingly, I think the last time we saw so much foreign companies investing in Taiwan or sending people was the high-speed rail. And, you know, after that Taiwan always had semiconductors and some foreign companies invested, but you wouldn't have suddenly an influx of a lot of Dutch people, a lot of Danish people, actually also a lot of British fellas coming over. Yeah.
It's interesting you brought up the high-speed rail because basically what's happening in Taiwan, specifically right now in terms of the offshore wind industry, I haven't seen since the days of the high-speed rail. Before that, since the highways and developments and the railways back in the day. So it seems to be these. Every now and then there's a project that catches on.
Yeah, you get like these big infrastructure projects, these huge opportunities, and offshore wind is a very European thing, or has been, so it's very natural for Europe to have an interaction and with Taiwan on that one. Yeah.
And so, I mean, you talk about luck, and I think for a lot of people listening, they really want to kind of think they don't really want to think it's just about luck. But I mean, you had to be there and you had to know what you were doing when the opportunity came along. Yeah. I mean, how did you kind of take advantage of your position or your innate ability to study or whatever it was? How did you how did you focus and, follow that passion, but also learn enough that you're now the CEO of a major international corporation?
It's a lot of patience and grind. And it's also coming with that background in Chinese studies where you learn, if you're more on the social sciences, languages, you learn to be able to jump into a lot of new topics. You know, on one hand side, you do like classical Chinese, then you suddenly do Cultural Revolution, then you have to read into Tang Dynasty, then you do like, democratization in Taiwan. I wrote about the financial sectors in the 1980s. So you have this, you learn or you get educated to really work yourself into new topics and then stay on these topics, and you learn kind of back then from university how to do more research and how to get more information. And then if you actually work for a semi-government association or even for those chambers, you get actually exposed to a lot of people and a lot of networks. And people will, because we were in bilateral trade, right? So there were German companies asking, how can I do business in Taiwan? And then they were explaining what they were doing. And then we would find out who in Taiwan could help them. And you start building a network. And you kind of also start to feel when a market could move, which is quite important. I often try to be, even when we now develop an offshore wind in APEC, is how can I get in front of the market? Because that's really hard timing. It can happen that you are too late and everybody's already there and you go like, what happened here? Why is there offshore wind?
So I feel like this is happening in offshore wind now. There's a lot of people saying, I really want to get into offshore wind. And I'm kind of like, well, there are a few people who are doing it already, you know?
Yeah. It's in Taiwan, the big window was 2016 to 2018.
Okay.
For, it's also interesting that industry was so small at that time. You could get to know everyone. It was perhaps 30, 40 people. Now it's thousands, so it's really hard.
You organized a few exhibitions and conferences, seminars, this kind of stuff. And you had people come in from Denmark, Germany, the UK, etc., attending these conferences. These were more academic conferences, right? They were sharing, they were industry people, but they were sharing conceptual
In the
stuff.
beginning, it would be more conceptual, like
Right.
how is this working before they really go into marketing pitches, yes.
Right, but how important do you think that process was in order to set up Taiwan for because I haven't seen that sort of exhibition, seminar process for an industry since maybe the heady days of biotech or something back in maybe 2000, something like that. How important do you think that was in developing this industry?
I think they are extremely important, and you see that as capacity building now in Southeast Asia as well. Because in the beginning, let's say, European were coming and kind of explaining, okay, what is offshore wind? What are the challenges? What do you need to change in your regulatory system? How would that potentially work? And then you open up the eyes of, let's say, Taiwan and say like, okay, that's actually quite interesting. Onshore wind in Taiwan was always like, there's a lot of, people are against it. It's in your backyard and offshore wind is so far away, so why not do it? And then I think they also got a little bit surprised, but then it really happened. But actually, that is important. And then there will be also players on the government side that I also know for 15 years, or even some of the Taiwanese industries, which I went to Husum in 2009, who are still around. And then you have these long-standing relationships where you understand what they are doing, where they're coming, you can support each other. So that's so you kind of build this core network.
So you've talked a little bit about at the beginning, you've talked about how it's important to kind of be a generalist, to get involved in a lot of different things. But I'm also hearing here from you that you've got to kind of go in a bit deeper and you've got to build networks that long-term can assist you and support you. For someone who's developing a career, how important do you think that part of developing a career? I mean, I feel like, and I'm going to stop you for a second, I feel like you've never applied for a job. I feel like you've just been there and people have given you jobs.
I've been lucky on that one because even, you start with an internship, which by the way, not promote this too much. It's always a great start. That's also why we're happy to support the British Chamber, for example, for the internship programs, because that's where you can, as an intern, expose yourself to the company and they might like you and then they take you on. Or you could even figure out, oh, that's not what I want to do. Right. Then you go somewhere else. So, and then I was lucky that there was a new director coming into the German trade office or German chamber and kind of changing things. And he was seeing like, okay, this guy speaks a little bit of Chinese. He's a bit knowing what's going on. So yeah, let's come and be a manager of science and technology, which was quite broad. But then you try to, yes, we also did makeup and import of food and apples and all these kind of things. But then you start to see like, okay, this is actually solar, renewable energy, onshore wind, offshore wind. It's very interesting. And then I think you always should apply and try to understand how is that industry really working? Because if you're too much a generalist, it's also not a good thing. I think, you need to kind of, and I'm more from the commercial side, so it would be more about business model, who are the market participants, when can they really build a project, when it becomes interesting for them, what do they need? When they come into Taiwan, I'm also, in that position I'm in, I'm kind of a cultural bridge because I understand, let's say, European culture or more German or Northern European is perhaps a little bit closer than the British culture, but I've worked with a lot of people from the UK. And I can explain Taiwan to them and vice versa, and I can try to make sense and give them context on that.
So I think this kind of cross-cultural stuff, I think, is something that often people downplay. It's like, bringing in kind of expat expertise into a market and kind of dumping them in here. I mean, I've seen this over 30 years of a career, that I've had. It's not exactly the easiest thing just to be dumped somewhere new, right? You've come in here, you've had some background, you've had some cultural understanding, and you've come in and you've known the language and stuff like that. How important? And have you seen examples of kind of good and bad cases of, just not being able to kind of fit into this, even though you've got the expertise to do the job,
I think you see that actually a lot, and it's really challenging because you're suddenly in an environment where you don't speak the language, you don't really understand what's happening around you. Also the way, let's say, people communicate or they behave, or are they fast-paced, are they reliable, did they really mean now that they want to do this, or was it actually, they didn't say no, but they actually meant no. And you have seen people fail on this, and they might just withdraw themselves and then leave. And then you have some people who are very natural, outgoing, and then build their networks, or they rely on people that then, like compradors or whatever you want to call them, who kind of help them to understand this. And in defense, Chinese is an extremely difficult language to learn. So if you get plugged into Taiwan and I had the fortune, like 8 years of studies, and then still learning while being in Taiwan, right?
I think in defense of Chinese, I think it's probably one of the furthest away from a European language as you can get. It's not inherently evil. Right? It's not. It's difficult in a way, but I think just for European speakers, it's so far away from where we come from. Sorry, I interrupted you. Go.
No, but I think it's quite important because you sometimes see this in the interaction. If you speak, let's say, Chinese, and then some people, even in Taiwan, let's say English level, sometimes not so good, so they might be not able to express themselves. And then if you do not speak the language, you might make a call like, they have no idea what they're talking about. But if they speak in the native language, they make complete sense and are very smart, right? So
this is something that people do. They judge. People judge culture. They judge intelligence based on language ability. And I've seen this, and I've had a number of colleagues, and maybe we'll touch on this now when talking about sort of learning and development. I've had a number of colleagues over the years have come to me and said, I'm not getting promoted, And I say, look, I really value you. I think you're fantastic. I speak Chinese, you speak Chinese, we're very comfortable. But when it comes to managing an international project, right, I mean, the Germans are speaking English, the Danes are speaking English, everybody is speaking English to do these things. Whether it's right or wrong, let's not go down that cultural debate, right? But, you need to have all the skills, right? It's not enough just to be a good engineer or a good whatever, a good salesperson even, but you need to be able to communicate with you.
Communication is actually quite important. That's also something we try to emphasize now in working at NIRAS, that we have really smart and good and talented people, but we are actually investing in improving English communication, but even communication skills in general, so that they can, because we work in international teams, so that they can kind of express themselves, ask the right questions, also then sometimes say if they don't understand what's going on, because also challenging all the Europeans with the different accents, it can be quite a thing to get this Babylonic language, even so English is lingua franca, but there's still, and then there might be, Germans and Danes can be very direct, so don't talk about,
Well, this is super. I was working with a friend of mine the other day who's moved to an American company, and originally he was working for, I won't say the name, but a very big German company, also involved in offshore and stuff. And, he was used to the German style of communicating in English. Both are using a second language and both are being very direct and straight. And then he was suddenly working for another company and these people were, they were getting angry at him. And all he was doing was saying, here's what's wrong with you. The project won't work because 1, 2, 3, and 4. Whereas what they were hearing was, you haven't done a good job. There's this cultural element to what things are. And I think this is, for someone like you, I think this is the value that people like you have.
That I would say, but you're also right. Actually, companies might not value it in the beginning. But for example, specifically when I was interviewing for NIRAS, it was actually a point they were looking for, because they were kind of trying to, it's in Taiwan, but it's actually quite European business. So you have this very international business. So they were looking for somebody who can walk in both worlds and can, kind of manage the local team, but then also work with overseas and also with the international clients. So there is an asset, and I think for a lot of people who studied language in the beginning of their career, that might be very frustrating because people might not really value that. But the more you get into it, and then you need, you find some better technical understanding of something, and then you can actually have quite a career on that one. Because naturally people would think, especially in renewable energy, an engineer will always have a career, but there's actually space for people with sociology backgrounds, political science, languages, management, and so on, environment. So that's sometimes even surprising that this is also a career path there.
So I'm hearing from you now that you're saying don't limit yourself, right? I mean, don't think just because you're not an engineer that you can't work in an offshore wind area, right? You have to think about what value you can bring, right?
Be open-minded. That's actually also a very good skill to kind of say, okay, why is this happening? I need to understand this. And then make sense of the whole thing and build it in context. Yeah.
So we mentioned at the beginning, you're the father of 4. How old are your children?
The oldest one turns 10, and the youngest one is now 5 months.
So you're getting to the point now as a parent where you're going to start thinking about their future. You know, are there things that you want them to be studying, learning, doing that you didn't have the opportunity to do, or that you did that you think are super important?
I think that's a really good question, because I'm kind of also biased. I think they should all become IT engineers, because then they will have a great career. But I think one thing we do is classical music. That's important, you know. Language, I hope that their German gets better. It's a bilingual household. I want them to have an open worldview, which is, again, we're probably going a lot around language, but if you speak Chinese, if you speak English, German, you suddenly open up such a big world of information, of different cultures, characters, logical thinking.
Well, communication is really just access to people, access to information, access to knowledge, right? I mean, that's all it is. It's a tool to get a way to communicate with people.
But then I think for them it will be actually quite important to learn some kind of IT skill, software skills. You know, there's like these Lego robots you can build. There's something I think they should at least learn, not just to use. You know, we use our mobile phones very natural, but perhaps to understand what's behind that. Yeah.
Okay.
But broad education should be quite important, but that's coming even down, you know, like from our family of academics and.
And you're married. Yeah. You're married locally.
Yep.
Yeah. So, is there? I mean, I'm not. I don't want to say that your wife and you fight, but I mean, are there cultural differences or conflicts in terms of the way you would see that educational development of the future of children? Do you see, or amongst your friends, or do you see anything like that? I'm not fishing for it. I'm just asking.
I think they go to local school, and even they're now 2nd and 3rd grade, and the 3rd one is still in kindergarten. There's a lot of testing already. And I'm like, do you really need to do this? You know, does my son need to sit there, you know, at 8 p.m. writing some Chinese? And I get it, Chinese is a hard language, right? But should he not just, you know, go out and drive a bicycle? Yeah. That's for one thing. But on the other hand side, it probably makes him harder to do so. So I think, but actually, that's quite aligned, because Taiwanese are also very supportive of good education. So it's just a different way. And then probably if we have this European discussion, you know, kids should play and they should learn more naturally, and you know, you don't need to test the hell out of them from grade 1, you know, give them a little bit of space. Then the Taiwanese would say, no, you know, it's like 8 hours, like starting in the morning, classes, bushiban, cram school, after outside curricula, all these kind of things. Like keep them busy.
All education has value, right? Yeah. It's kind of how you value it. I mean, I grew up in Australia, and there was a big thing about, you know, children should be happy. Yes, that's nice. But, you know, happiness without actual kind of rigor or without learning, I think, is a kind of, you know, how does this, I mean, being a parent, has that changed the way you, I mean, obviously you're a CEO now, you're running a big company. Has being a parent changed the way you manage people?
I think it does a little bit, because you also, as a father, then you're more like on family values. You probably also see more like that you look after people. It's kind of give people space, because one of the experience I had after the German trade office, I was working for another company which was more Taiwanese managed, and perhaps not the way I would manage. I would always say means justify the end. Very internal political strifes, and you know, it's kind of the way that they handled people was not really people to people. It was more like SOPs, and if I don't like you, things disappear, and I'm not supportive and not transparent. So, and I think that kind of stress at work is not very healthy. So and then I had the chance to build, basically, in between I had my own company, which was a very free time, and I could do a lot of nice projects, but then didn't necessarily feed for 3 kids at that point. Then I had a very small, another British company I worked for, and then for NIRAS now there's a bigger team you're looking after, and you kind of want them to come into work and kind of enjoy being at work. And it's not always enjoyable. We have, you know, you have clients that go off, or somebody has a bad day, or they're not happy with, you know, decision that's even been made by me or other people. But kind of that they can find fulfillment in their work, that they can apply what they learned. I mean, we are in the consulting business on the environmental side and the engineering side, so it's a very brain-driven business. So it's all about people, technical skills. So they should kind of also be able to maneuver themselves, and, you know, not work themselves to death or be afraid like management by fear. That's not how it should work. So, and that's probably also changing if you're a father or mother, is kind of, you have a different worldview then on that one, because also your life center might change. Because if you're perhaps younger, then it's all about career and all these steps. But then you look after family, you want to make sure that they go at least through university, and then they have a good life, and then hopefully I can retire at 60. But you kind of, get a longer outlook. And,
so how do you go about building up a community? I mean, you're talking about you want people to be happy at work. And that doesn't mean they're not doing their jobs. It doesn't mean they're not focused, right? But I mean, you want them to be, at least to not wake up in the morning and think, oh, God, I've got to go to work, right? So how do you go about building an environment like that?
On the one hand side, first of all, you try that they don't sit down and just stare at the desk, so that you have a team spirit. And even when I joined NIRAS, that was already a really good team as a team itself. So that was easy. There were other challenges, but at least they already worked as a team. You want them to flow information to each other, and because we have these two practices, they actually can learn from each other, or they can know something then better and talk to the client. So you want them to interact. You might support this by, on the one hand side, yes, you have your company outings, you have your team building, but then you have to also foster a communication environment where people, go up to somebody else and go to the desk and ask them a question, and the other person also accepts that, and not goes like, I'm doing my work, to go away. So you kind of have you create these interactions. And then what we also try to do, which sometimes work, is we want actually people to spend time on learning and development, because offshore wind is often, we're helping other companies to build their projects. So has a lot of new applications or old know-how, but even then you always have to keep up a little bit with, new regulations, new ideas, new technologies, so that they also spend some of their time actively looking for courses or reading into something, or that we try to organize, it's actually it's a bigger company with 2,600 people, but there's other wind business in the UK and Denmark and Sweden and Norway, and that we have them also meet and exchange to just see. It's kind of, again, the horizon thing. Like, you can always just get caught in ornithology and birds, but what if, somebody talks about turbines and how they're built, or somebody else says, what about marine mammals, about fishery, what about policy? Because often you get also lost in the woods in offshore wind, but it's a complicated industry. We are also now going through some pain again, where you need to understand, how are the projects really developing? Is your client coming with a real project, or they're just trying to, or what would happen on the regulatory side so that they can really build it? But I would like and it's probably sometimes for some people they are not that interested, but I would always like them to understand the bigger picture a little bit in Taiwan, but then even in the region, so that they can make a call and that they can be also knowledgeable when they talk to clients.
So the big picture is a super big question. Every time this is called Leadership Matters, this podcast. I talk to leaders generally. A lot of leaders will talk about the big picture, and it's very important to people who are running something that is a large organization. The reality is, for most of us, when you talk to staff at various different levels, a lot of them it's a job. It's I come in here, it's a paycheck, and if you didn't give me the paycheck, I wouldn't come in, right? Whereas a lot of leaders actually probably would still go in even without the money. There's an element of passion about it. And I'm not saying that nobody has passion in a company, but how do you go about building this sense of kind of wonder and curiosity into people who are, it's a job,
One thing is coming by recruiting the right people with that mindset. The other thing is trying to get them more involved and understand is that and we have the blessing in offshore when we do something good. We build renewable energy, right? So for them to be also understanding what they do, and even if they're just some small part of the whole thing, they're actually important to it, and their support makes the project work. So they have been in, like a successful part of it. So to kind of, perhaps also sometimes we might do something smaller, but it might have a big impact on the client. And some clients are very nice, and then they say, hey, you did a really great job, and because you did this for us, so now we can really carry on, right? But perhaps to let everybody in the office feel that is a thing. But then I agree, some people are just, it's perhaps, work-life balance discussion, but but you would generally try to have people that are trying to understand a little bit more
why they're doing it. Start with the right people, right?
Yeah, start a little bit with the right people and look for these skills. Yeah.
Recruitment is a real minefield. I mean, it's very difficult, especially your industry. I mean, a lot of it's there's a limited amount of people who are experts or at a certain level. I hear this from everybody working in the offshore wind industry that they're trying to recruit people. I mean, how can you? I mean, obviously you're involved in internships. I mean, you mentioned that building the kind of future of people in offshore wind. How can you go about building an industry where the people don't exist?
It's extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult. But it's an interesting discussion because some of the European colleagues, they use, because the industry is older there, so they're often asking like, yeah, I want to have an experienced person doing that. And I'm always thinking like, you won't find that in Taiwan. What you will be looking for is perhaps people that come from big infrastructure projects, or people that are very open-minded, or people, we have somebody who worked in Mongolia, like they throw themselves out at new things and try to learn new things. So you get them in there, and then you have to train them. That's one of, and that will be also true for Southeast Asia. That might be even true for Australia, which have built oil and gas and mining, but you will need to train them up because our industry is also like there's more demand than supply. And HR and offshore, HR is a very important topic for us in offshore wind. It's where do you find the talent? How do you retain the talent? How do you make yourself attractive? Because they have so much choice. They can go anywhere. They can, in Taiwan, there's kind of this understanding that the project owners, the developers are on the top. So everybody wants to work for them. But then we are like tier 1, 2, we're like in a consulting company. So you kind of, how do you convince them? Like, yeah, it might be cool to work for a project owner, but hey, if you come to us, we're not just working on one project. You might be able to work on 4 different projects and so on. So how do you kind of convince them? And I still didn't find an answer to like, is it salary? Is it, a nice coffee machine? Is this the opportunity to learn? Is what we try to do actually is, we try to get our people out. So we send them to Japan, we send them to Manila. I try to get them to Denmark so that they're not just, that they get, because we're more international, that they kind of get an exposure to that thing. But then, there's different. We had one we lost, but that was okay. In the end, he was deciding between us, but then he was living farther away and the other company was closer. So then that was a decision for that person. But wow. It's for Taiwan, it's not us just in offshore wind. I think it's going to be a huge challenge for going forward because it's a super aging society.
Right. This is amazing what's happening here.
And I feel it's actually a threat to business because if you don't find people, you need people in our business to consult, to do things. If you don't find them, you can't do work, so you don't have business. So it's kind of for Taiwan as a location that's going to be very difficult, or there's going to be some kind of maturing of the market. Interesting, we're now building this wind practice in the Philippines, and nobody has any idea about offshore wind, but it's 130 million people and a very young nation that somehow Taiwan was 20 years ago. So at least recruiting, we found 2 people very fast, and we're now training them up, but it's a completely different labor market in that sense. Well, yes, if you're at specialist level, it's everywhere hard to find, but at least on that side. But I think for Taiwan, even outside the semiconductor industry, we're actually looking into a project on green jobs right now for an NGO we're working with. And semiconductor industry in Taiwan is paying better than the green energy industry in average, but they're also struggling with the same thing, less and less people graduating. So when my eldest one was born, there were like 240,000 babies. When my youngest one was born, it's only 130,000. So and then think like, how many will go to university? How many will go into STEM? How many will go into, it's kind of, will AI rescue us and we will need less people? And it's kind of...
We all have to put our hopes on AI. Is this, you mentioned the Philippines, obviously, that's a very populous place. But is this a global phenomenon? How is this?
Absolutely. The colleagues in Denmark are struggling. Everybody's like, they have full order books, not only us, our competitor as well, but there's not enough people to fulfill these orders. The UK, similar struggles. It's all across these nations who are kind of... But that's also, on the one hand thing, in some it's aging society, but here it's evaporated because it has been a slowly growing industry, and, Taiwan was at 5 gigawatt, was a big market, but now in Europe they wanted to build 150 gigawatt. It's just the scale of this, the money that's flowing into it, the people you will need, the turbines, the vessels is just exploding. It's like what they say, mega trend, right? So, So, but then how do you get more and more people into that industry and interested? Yeah.
Do you find is it a sexier industry now than it was when you were first starting out?
Interesting, yes, because renewable energy for historical reasons in Taiwan was not like, there was always this, in the mid-beginnings of 2000, actually the National Atomic, what were they called? Like the Nuclear Science Council in Taiwan. So they were actually in charge of nuclear. They were also made charge in promoting renewable energy. And you can imagine how that went. They were like, oh, that's super unstable and that's not working. So, and back then Taiwan and the government were also against it. So it was kind of a dirty industry. So it was not really easy to attract people into solar or wind because people were like, it's very small and we hear it's unstable and it's it's going nowhere. And
I kept hearing all these things. It's ugly. It covers up the land. It's gonna, there was all sorts of things.
Yeah. But then actually offshore wind, when it came, it also the size. There's far more capital investment. There was more effort from the companies. It's a little bit more concentrated. It's a very well-paying industry in Taiwan. So that's certainly a plus point. So even for people that enter the market from the university, they earn far more than when I hear what traditional industry is paying, what we pay is nearly double on an entrance. So, and I would actually argue that now the salary levels for Taiwanese, at least in some specialized areas, let's say project owners, consultants, they can earn the same as a person in the UK. It's just kind of because the market is so constricted and there's not that many people going around, so you can.
Is this lack of kind of resources, people, right? Does this mean that people kind of jump ship often?
That has happened a lot.
Yeah.
That has happened a lot. Yeah. There's if you follow some careers, they went like every year or every second year. So, and then you have people that stay longer. But that's a challenge because if you, for any business, but even for us, if you lose somebody after 2 or 3 years, you lose a lot of know-how. Then the next one comes in, you need to train them up for 6 months, but then it's also on the company. How do you make them see a vision like this is a good job, and even if the next one offers you 10 or 20% more, what about the work environment? Is the other work environment really that good? Can I really, go home earlier if I need to, or can I, do learning and development, or do I have actually nice colleagues? Because that's probably one risk if you change jobs. It could be, if you're in an interview, they will tell you all the nice things and they will show you like where all the cookies are, and then you come in and then it might go already wrong. That's kind of the challenge. But yeah, we have seen this a lot. It's now a little bit more stabilized, but it's also, I guess, because the market is currently going into a freeze. That's more like current policy problems. But we have seen that interchanging. And I think in the new markets, we will see similar things, which will be a challenge for us because we are very early in, and then we have to keep our people that they not go to the next offer they might get. But that's... Yeah.
How do you go about reminding people about the vision? I mean, it's super important. Everybody I ever talks to me about vision. You need to have the vision. You want freedom of communication. You want input from everyone. But there's one thing that can't change, right? Is this vision. How do you go about? I mean, do you put a poster on the wall?
I would sometimes. I have seen this a long time ago when I visited Merck or Siemens. They have always like these nice, go into the office and they have their kind of propaganda things like it's a great company.
Believe.
And all these things. We try to do town halls. I'll try to use, we have our bi-weekly meetings to remind everyone, but it's also, it's a very conscious task. And this actually, if you talk about leadership, yes, that's leadership that I can provide, but it even sometimes need to come from headquarters. So like the big guys need to, either come out or they need to invite, and then they need to send messages. Something that's, it's sometimes internal communications, and then you have your intranet, but that's actually not good enough. What about a nice email from the CEO going, this is really great, and this is, we want to do more of that, and that's where we want to go, and all these kind of things. So,
how important do you think praise is?
It's actually, it's interesting. I have been actually last year criticized by somebody for that. I think it's quite important.
As in, you don't give praise, or you do?
Even so, I'm German. We don't praise.
Oh, yeah, of course.
It's just like it's good enough.
You did your job, therefore,
it's all okay. No. You have to actually constantly give positive feedback. Praise, and then you have to also point out what's going wrong. And actually what I try to foster, and which seems to have some success within our unit, is you have to have like this, people could also be able to criticize and say like, this is going wrong. I'm not agreeing with this, can we not do it another way? That's actually quite important, because that I feel is, there might be something cultural, but it's something even within Taiwanese culture you can change, or you can make ways where people can actually speak up, or they know like, okay, if they take you aside, then they can directly, criticize your actions. Kind of on a, not on a personal level, but say like, okay, I don't really agree to that. But it's important because I think it also makes people, it gives you value. Like you did this, and especially if somebody, pulls, we had tenders that can get until 1 a.m. in the morning. So then, you kind of, because you've done that, that was really good.
Yeah. And people get tired, right, as well. I mean, people's tempers can...
That can also flare up. Yeah. But also what is always helpful is like, we had a really nice comment from a client last time. They said like, this was the best report they ever read. So it's not only praise from the CEO, it's actually good if your clients, right. But you will also have situations where the client says that was really wrong.
So this is a really interesting point for you as a manager. And again, you've come from kind of semi-government, government, all the way through to managing a big international company. Developing yourself, changing if you need to, the way that you just said yourself, you came from a German culture, a little bit direct or whatever, don't praise, people don't say nice things. How have you gone about trying to, develop yourself?
It's probably, on the one hand side, often the companies have given opportunities for some management training, but then I would go around like Coursera or read Harvard Business Review. and try to reflect. You need to do this because otherwise you get caught up too much in your daily work, and you need to be like self-critical sometimes, like why did this went wrong? Because if one of the challenges is you do management by numbers, you might, there were situations before where, let's say it's not doing well and you start to use metrics on people and you scare them actually, and you scare them into actually being like paralyzed. So that doesn't really work. So now we look at our bottom line at NIRAS, but I'm not running around going like, okay, your utilization rate has to be 90%. Whoop. It's not how that will work, to see that bigger picture. I understand as if the corporation gets bigger and the manager gets more and more detached. So the nice thing is like we are 16 people. So it's still like I can kind of keep tabs on everyone.
Because they used to talk about, kind of management by Excel spreadsheets, It's like, well, we need 15% growth around the world, so we've just put yours up by 25% because we know we're going to be down somewhere else, and so you just have to do that. And this kind of approach to management can be really disheartening, I think, for people.
Seems to be also cultural. I think I'm actually quite like NIRAS as a Danish company, they're a bit more relaxed on that, but I know that from some American companies where just go across the board and everybody's going like, that's not going to work, and it's not going to work, but they're going to, I say 50 and then they did 30, and I said, hey, well, you see, you did 30%. If I would have said 30, you would only do 15, but but you have to be careful what you measure in a company and where you really look, and,
Right. What you measure is what you get. Right. If you, I've been experienced recently of a company that the work from home thing that's been around. So one of the managers who was very uncomfortable with working from home, as soon as kind of COVID has gone away, it's not gone away, but as soon as, it feels like it's gone away, right? And so he immediately changed the work from home rule that had been put in place. The work from home rule was not in place only because of COVID. It was in place because there were people who have children, there were people who have other parts of their lives, there are people who just, some people are more efficient from different places, right? So he took that rule away. And you've now got an office of people who are wondering, well, why have you, well, I need to, and so what he's measuring is, he's measuring the time that you're in an office, right? He's need to see you in this office. Literally the email said, we want to see you in the office now, 9 until 6 or whatever it is, And so I just, and it raised another issue to me. I saw again, research now is all done on TikTok, right? So I watched a TikTok video of a guy saying, pay me $18,000 to design a logo for you. So what are you paying for it? He's like, well, it'll take you 3 months. I'm paying you per hour or whatever like that. Okay, I'll do it for you in 5 minutes and you'll love it. Oh, I'm not going to pay you $18,000 for that. He said, but I've given you the same thing. It's taken me 5 minutes. So actually I'm much more efficient and I've given you enough, saved you 3 months of time. Why wouldn't you pay me $18,000 for that? And it's all about how you measure, the value you place on people. Are you buying their time to be around, or are you buying the results of what you want?
Yeah, but this whole work from home thing is very interesting. I think for it depends on your style, but for some people that delegate and manage, I think it becomes more stressful because their team is suddenly dispersed. And if they would be in the office, they catch them at a coffee machine or they see what they're doing, they can grab them. But if you have like 4 or 5 people working somewhere else, and then you need to kind of reach out, you need to find new ways to manage them. And I agree, it's actually best if you can just say, man, I mean, the idealistic thing would be also by 40 hours a week. Okay, I shouldn't say that too loud, but like, you hit that was your target, you hit your target, you did it in 5 minutes or you did it in 8 hours. That's not really the point, but I kind of see where this is challenging, interesting. We have a work from home policy. People decided to come back to the office. But I'm also back in the office, so I'm not sometimes sure it's because I'm in the office than they are in the office. But some people, actually, it was also interesting, some people really liked working from home. Other people are far more social. They were like, oh, finally I can go and see people and meet people. And it's also the character of work. So on the environment side, they do these big environmental impact assessments, hundreds of pages, different experts, and they need to have access to each other very fast on very big documents. So being at the same place actually helps a little bit more. But now, as we are spreading across Asia, it becomes very obvious that I will have teams in Manila and in Hanoi and perhaps with the other team in Melbourne, but then that's teams, right? But I still think it's very important to meet people in person and to build this trust, because also the other question is probably if you have established relationship, work from home is quite easy. You know each other, right? But if somebody new comes in, how do you onboard them? How do you make them feel part of the team? It's not the end of the discussion, but actually our business could do, I mean, yeah, you have your mobile phone, I have my mobile phone. I can do my online banking, I can check my emails, I can write something, I can get a computer anywhere, and this is actually quite nice. So you don't have to be in the office in that sense. Right. Yeah.
So functionally, I think we can do it, right? Yeah. Functionally, we can work from anywhere. But again, it comes back to, you brought a good point, which I think people often forget, is just this ability to interact with people on a human level. And that's kind of what we're saying is wrong with social media and stuff now, that people are communicating on a different, they're not communicating directly to people. They're just putting things out there and, I've told the whole world that I've got a new girlfriend or a new boyfriend or whatever, so everybody knows. But taking them around and meeting your parents or, or actually, having dinner with friends or something, it's a totally different thing. So I guess there's a place for both, right? You need to have this kind of connected. So hybrid is the big thing now.
But does that also work? But yeah, I see that in Manila, for example, the traffic is really awful and people really commute long. So for them, it's really good that they can work from home. In Taipei, it's a little bit different. But yes, the nice thing about COVID was learning, you can have 2 hours of your life back.
Right.
That you don't spend, on the red line of the MRT and then just, looking at TikTok or reading something. So, yeah. And you might have, you can take some time if you want to write a report and you don't want to be disturbed. So it should be actually. And I think for some people, it will be also part of their decision in their career, kind of, can I do that? And will I be allowed? But I think a lot of companies in reality still struggle with that.
I think a lot of managers struggle with not having people around. If you don't see them, are they working? Yeah. And I think that's, I can understand that. I'm a believer in outcomes, and I've been lucky enough to have worked in kind of industries and stuff like that where it's pretty obvious if something's happened, it's happened, right? If it's not happened, but it's an interesting point. I want to kind of come back to you as a kind of a human being now, and just kind of, we'll round this off with some stuff, because you're working in a green industry, renewable energy. Does that cascade down into the life that you lead? Does that affect you as a human being? I mean, do you drive a Tesla, for instance, or or do you not have a car, or do you do you recycle at home, or how much does who you are, right?
Yeah, sometimes I joke I built so many offshore wind farms, I'm okay.
Your soul is fine. Your soul is clean. Don't worry.
I'm kind of, I'm ready to, No, I think it does because, I'm kind of really passionate about the whole thing. So it's also like what's happening now in offshore wind is kind of emotionally draining me in Taiwan, which is a bit unhealthy, but that's how it is because it's such a big opportunity and might fail now. That's really not good. But it kind of does because you think what else can you do? I'll take the MRT. I just walked here. What kind of life changes? I'm not an extremist in that sense. I mean, you could become vegan and offset your CO2 and all these things. But yeah, you're getting more aware about also, if you look at your environment, if you travel somewhere and then is this actually, it looks green, but is it green, the river's dried out or muddy and what can be done? And is beach cleaning the right answer to this or could we do more? It's kind of,
Well, I think we can always do more, right? Yeah. I mean, I gave away my car a couple of years ago and haven't driven for a while, but I still take Ubers, but I feel like I'm sharing, I'm sharing the car with somebody. So I'm reducing my carbon footprint, if not getting rid of it entirely.
But you get perhaps also an advocate and you talk to others, like, you meet somebody who might own a factory and say like, why didn't you think about a solar power plant? Right. Or did you think about, could you do more for the community? Can you be more active? How can you contribute? Did you, it's sometimes just opening people's eyes because they might just not know. And right. You kind of talk to them and say...
And do you think this is industry's job, or is it government's job, or is it NGO's job, or is it, whose job is it to... Because people go,
my view on government would be actually it's a government job, but I think in Taiwan it's sometimes not how the government thinks. The industry should play a role, and it should avoid greenwashing. That's actually going to be seen that now a lot with ESG in Taiwan. It's a massive amount of greenwashing.
ESG
ongoing.
Is one of my kind of. I think a lot of people are doing some really good work in ESG, but again, this comes back. I originally started work in NGOs and I was working in CSR and stuff like that. We've known each other for a while, and CSR was CSR washing for a while. People were producing CSR reports, right? And the CSR reports say, we pay our people on time. We're nice to our staff, and that was their CSR report. Literally, I've seen that in reports written like that. ESG is becoming the same sort of thing, where people are producing ESG reports, and they're talking big about it. But how deep is it going?
Yeah, it's just, I was judged on a panel, and then some of them wrote in their application for a sustainability award that they go to a paperless office and was thinking, guys, this is how it is, you don't need to, why would you want to get points for that? Yeah. But then they did even more stuff, and then it was like, okay, that's really good, and you're really thinking about what you're doing. But I think what industry can do is a bit of an advocacy for volunteer work. Also, being myself, and you have been also working for the British Chamber, right? Is companies can actually contribute more to NGOs, either to their industry peers by spending time or making budget available. One of the challenges in Taiwan's NGO world, there are too many, and they're not very well financed. And what I've seen sometimes in offshore wind is that some money is spent on big global associations or some conference companies, take that budget and give it to a Taiwanese NGO. They can go far further with, like $5,000-10,000 to really kind of see how much of that money you can spend. And I know sometimes if you're subsidiary, it's difficult, and I have that freedom in my company, lucky enough that we can spend our own marketing budget. And I know some people need to go back home, but I think it's actually quite important to choose one or two NGOs and to contribute. And often, also seeing that just in one of the committees is that, this person is working private industry, has super skills, and he can help the other association by applying those skills, which the association could never afford to employ somebody like this. But he's really pushing these projects forward, and he's doing a great job because you can, as companies, you have very, very skilled people, and if they can spend, and it's time actually, I also sometimes kind of think like, do I really need to spend so much time on that? And not looking at my timesheet, but if they can spend perhaps 10 hours a month in supporting, by bringing in input, or, if they're very knowledgeable about a certain field, might be social media work, might be, studies, and then really help those associations because that's where they live.
People think about volunteer work actually often. They think about, well, I've got to go and, you said beach cleanup, right? They think about that, or they think about, going and cleaning something, or just washing something, or painting a house or whatever. But actually using whatever skills you've got can be volunteer work. If you're a manager and you're really good at P&L, work with an NGO, right? And I've spent, some of my time just simply going through business plans with the NGOs, and you realize that, people who mean good don't always necessarily have the skill sets. It's not judging. It's just that, it's not necessarily the same thing. So giving what we can, using the skills we've got and giving that back is also a good part of how to clean our souls, right? How to keep our souls clean.
But I've seen that there are not many co-ops in solar, but there's one in northern Taiwan, which, for example, somebody from Taipower is part of that co-op, and that's really helpful. Then you can help a community to develop a project, or yes, you can look at business plan. Sometimes it's our network that we can make available to them, right? As if they want to organize a forum, or they want to speak to other people and raise, money, and then we can help with that. And it's kind of, for the listeners, there's a lot of, you can actually achieve a lot with small impact. Kind of a little bit of your time might have a big impact for somebody else. Yeah.
So I'm going to kind of round it up now. I want to kind of bring back, and let me if I could summarize some of the things we've talked about, and if you agree, let me know. If you don't agree, then you can correct me. But one of the things I heard early on from you is like, follow your passion, right? If you've got a passion for something, start off general, learn as much as you can, but once you learn that thing that really ignites you, go down that and become an expert. You did say, as a lot of people say, you need a little bit of luck, right? And I it's not just as simple as follow your dreams and your dreams are going to come real, right? As I said last time I was at this, for every Brad Pitt, there's 1,000 people who want to be an actor and never quite made it that far. But so you need a little bit of luck, but you've got to be ready for that luck.
Yeah, you need to, at the right point, you need to also know what, right. Yes. Yeah. I would also add, some stuff comes out, luck. But for example, I started, I knew some people from the beginning of my career, and then our paths crossed again like 10 years later. And it was very beneficial for the both of us. And we're good friends, but, we could really help. And it's also, especially in renewable energy, it's like a lot of patience and grind, don't give up too fast. If you run away after 2 months, it's not gonna, there is some some bitterness to be had, right. That also helps you grow. Yeah.
Keep going at it, right? Don't give up too early. Networking is super important. You just kind of alluded to that, but don't burn your networks, right? But also network. Get out there, join things, go to conferences, say hello to people, right? Just talk. I've never met anybody who, if I said hello to them, didn't say hello back.
Yeah, that's
right.
And he would be at the wrong event, yes.
Right. And after that, it's up to you if you can actually make a conversation or not. But you just get out there and talk to you. Don't limit yourself, right? Don't limit yourself. Communication, super important. I hear that from you, and not just communication of a fact. Communication of an idea, a concept, but also of a personality. Like understanding people around you. Speaking multiple languages helps, right? If you're working globally, then learn a bit of the local culture, local language as well. So it's going to help you get through. building team spirit. I like your kind of concept of building team spirit. And you've alluded to the fact that you need a little bit of work on this yourself.
Yeah, no,
right?
no, that's it's again like this was coming in. NIRAS has a great team. They still have a great team, but it still work. It's not a self-running thing like this. It's like football teams. They have a good season and they don't. So you need to kind of also push yourself a little bit to see how you can improve.
Learning and development, this is obviously something that's very important, and especially in an industry that you're working in now where, there's a lack of skill sets. Yeah. I mean, there's a lack of people with the skill sets that you need. So learning and development is super important. And this is all part of how you attract people, right? You build a good environment, you build good teams, you give learning and development. And you also talked about learning and development for yourself, which I like. It's this idea of kind of like you understood that you did not give praise readily. And you've said, okay, I've identified that as an issue, and I want to change that. And you've taken steps to change that and proactively gone out and said, hey, I'm going to recognize the fact that this person's done a good job. Yeah. And that's educating yourself, I think, is one of the hardest things you need to do. We all think we're right. We're all the superstars in our own movie,
But I think being self-critical is a good skill. Sometimes it's a bit overly on my side, but it's kind of reflecting like if something went wrong, why did it went wrong?
I've heard this sort of statement that if you're super smart, you'll understand what you've done wrong, and if you're really, really stupid, you won't care. So it's kind of
ignorance is bliss. Right?
Yeah. So really, I mean, look at yourself. Look at yourself and what you've done wrong, and try to analyze it and try to do it better, right? Yeah. But don't get don't get emotional about it, right?
Yeah. You can go down the path of depression if you take that.
Just come back. Just come back. Keep going. Raoul, it's been fun as always talking to you. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for the invitation. It was a good talk.
You can listen to this podcast live on the fourth Monday of every month on ICRT, and after that on the ICRT website, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Leadership Matters by Stephen Parker. You can also check out my social media. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. See you next time.